I am back from holiday and ready to get going again. The task today is to build the Aft Platform. And as has been the history of this build, we immediately have run into a crisis based on mistakes of the past. A very straightforward series of frames to be made up. And what we immediately did was photocopied this and made up this template. And then from that, we made a cardboard version of it. And believe it or not, from that, we made a wooden version of it. And into the model we go, and we fit it, and everything looks fine until we bring the height gauge up. And then we realize that we are a foot too high. Of course, the key dimension is the height of this beam here. And so when we get this beam down to the correct height, we see we are way off in terms of the width. And that's probably explains a few of the problems I had where I didn't take down the insides here enough, and which means that everything is a little bit too coming in too much. I should have taken down quite a bit more. So the learning from this is that we really should have this height gauge when we are cleaning up the inside of the model to get a rough height. The solution is not to build it to this width. The critical height is actually the height of the floor. So that's what we're going to do. We're simply going to make it thinner. And to do that, we are coming on our template, and we'll line it back up. And this is the reduced size, and that's going to work just fine. And this will give you an idea of the difference from what is included in the book. So what we did is photocopied it, cut the pieces out, and then went on the jigsaw and the bandsaw. Bandsaw gives us nice clean lines. And then once we cut the piece out, lining them up to see how they would fit. We used a balsa support to frame them up, and this is the final trial piece. Of course, the real test is fitting it into the model, and we had a little bit of adjustment to make, but at the end we got it down to the required height using the depth gauge as our guide. Clearly, we're going to have to thin the internal pieces a little bit. They're a little too big, and we're going to do that on the printer. There were two problems that identified itself when I made the trial piece. The first one was that in trying to line the pieces up using the guide of the larger piece, I got this thinning here, and it got much too thin on this side. And the second problem I had was that when I started sanding it down to level it out, I lost a full inch of thickness. So for me to end up at 5 inches, I'm actually going to start with a much thicker piece. In this case, it was a 9-inch piece, and then I can sand it down in a thickness sander. The thicker piece also made it much easier to cut the inside delicate pieces, because remember, these pieces, the grain will be going the right direction on one side and the wrong direction on the other. And once they're out and cleaned up, then we just mix up some epoxy and wait on that to dry. Now it's time to put the carlings in and the ledges. And to do this, we cut a mortise into the various pieces, the frames. In this case, this is a carling here, and this would be a ledge. For this exercise, the Jim Barnes offers 3 options: a 75-degree cut, 67.5, and 60. In my case, I've chosen 60, and then you'll have to cut a reciprocating mortise on the piece itself. And here are all the cowlings in place. It was a bit of a learning curve, but it came out pretty good in the end. This small square proved to be invaluable in setting up the 90-degree angles for the installation of the cowlings. We were able to fit the cowlings into the beams quite easily, but when I attempted to put the ledges into the cowlings, it turned out to be very problematic to line the pieces up. And in fact, even with my tiny square, I really was having a problem being able to line them up. So I've decided to ignore what is suggested in the book and stick them in square to the cowlings. I'm going to be covering them up anyway, and that's really the only way I'm going to get parallel pieces put in. To line up the side pieces, the square won't work, so we're using the center piece, which was squared, and a brass ruler plate, and that helps us line them up. This is as complete as I'm going to do it. I'm not going to put in any more internal frames, simply because it makes no sense. And we'll put it in the thickness planer, take it down to the 5 inches, and stick it in place. As with all the parts in this boat, we have covered it in termite fluid, waiting for it to dry. Then we'll put on 1 coat of polyurethane, rub-on polyurethane, and then lightly sand that off. Using the rub-on poly to seal the termite fluid means that I've locked it inside. Makes no sense putting the termite fluid on and sanding it and then coming and putting the poly on. You need to seal it inside. And this was done ready for all the parts. Sometimes it was a real pain in that it really slowed work down, because you have to wait at least 2 or 3 hours for the termite fluid to dry. We've cleaned it up. I actually changed the sandpaper on the thickness sander, and we've brought the floorboards down to 1.5 inches, and the frame is 5 inches, so the total thickness is 6.5 inches, and so we fit that in here. There we go. And we're just using the depth gauge. So that's the correct height on that side, and the correct height on the starboard side. We won't be sticking it in place because there are posts that are going to go up to the roof, and they have to pass through here. And I may have a problem with these cross supports here. So until I put that in place, only then am I going to stick the floor in place. I have to say it really came out very nice. That's the underneath, and that is the top of the floor. So again, following the same procedure of putting the termite fluid on, allowing it to dry, we then come and seal it in with the rub-on poly. And this is the first coat. It's pretty good, a little rough, but we'll put a very light sanding on it and come back and put the second coat on. The forward edge of the deck has a molding on it, and in the drawing it doesn't show it going all the way to the end. I took it all the way to the end. It has an overlap of 3 inches. We're just about to finish the aft platform, and all we had was the construction of the bulkhead. at the front or forward side of the aft platform. This seemed actually quite easy until I tried making up my cardboard templates to fit it in, and I found that the left side and the right side of the hull weren't exactly the same, and I really struggled. Took me 2 days, and eventually I came up with this system of slipping pieces in, and perhaps the best way is to show you on the model. Here we have a simulated beam, and the bulkhead is going to fit below that. And so we made up a little template on a card, and we want a nice clean line, clean fit. And you'll notice that these are equal on both sides, and the sides are slightly different. So the solution to that is we made up this little jig, and we can center pieces in it, and we can put this literally right in place. It's made up the exact same distance, and so we can now place these pieces straight on the model and cut pieces that will fit exactly, and we get nice clean lines. And out of that came this, and that really allows us to make a bulkhead that is going to fit perfectly on the frame of the model. On the ship, these planks would be going horizontal, not vertical. So I could now take this and cut horizontal pieces to match the profile. But again, because this is a learning exercise, I thought I'd just leave it like that, clean it up, and install it on the model. To hold it in place, I also had to add a little molding, which, as you can see here, gives me a nice 90-degree angle to the deck and allows the piece to stay. All that's left is to put the two 4x4 columns in place, and the aft deck is in fact now complete. Of course, we had the small extension that extends beyond the mizzen mast step. We made this up exactly the same way using the 12-inch mahogany planks that are 2 inches thick. We did use some cross bracing on the bottom and then sanded it to bring it to the same level. And I guess this brings us to the end of this part of the build. So we'll see you in the next video.